I'm Jeff Zarnett, and this is Software Career Growth. This is the second part of my interview slash discussion with Product Manager. There was a little bit too much to fit into one video, so here it is, part two. All right, welcome back. Thanks for taking some more time to talk with me. And the thing I wanted to talk about is working with product managers, because that's an important part of actually the way things get done. And if there isn't a good relationship between team members and product manager, it's going to be pretty uncomfortable to get some work done every day. And I can tell you some horror stories I've heard of people who've not had good work interactions along that line. So one of the things that I think about is in the early days, there was kind of a little bit of conflict between us, not like, bad conflict, not, the kind that's a problem, but just sort of like we had different ideas about what was the responsibility of the product manager versus what's the responsibility of the engineering manager. It's fun to look back on now, but I think each of us felt a little tiny bit frustrated in the very early days. And so what I'm going to say is that, like, to a certain extent, it's a negotiation of like what falls under whose responsibility. And would you agree with that? What are your thoughts?
100%. Let's look back, right? I had just come in from a different company, and I was used to doing things in a specific way. I was used to running the meetings. I was like kind of simultaneously Scrum Master, which you'll find a lot with product managers. They're also the one effectively running the sprints, the Scrum, setting the priorities, running all these meetings. And I thought I was going to do that again. And then suddenly you had put in all the meetings in the calendar, and you had started putting in agendas. And I was like, wait, you're taking my job. What am I going to do? I was actually a little bit concerned that I will not have any impact on anything because you're the one running the show. It's very silly to look at it in retrospect. And I think I've matured a lot during the last 3-4 years. But yeah, as you say, it's like it's a conversation. We're both in the same team, and we exist for the team. So neither me nor you can do a whole lot without a team. Well, you can, because you can actually write code today. But the only thing that a PM can do, is I can prioritize to my heart's content. But if there's no one that's going to pick up any of the stories to work on them, then it's kind of pointless. So that interface and looking at the PM and the engineering manager as kind of like the leads of the team is really important.
Yep, I agree with that. And a lot of my, I'm creating the meetings and I'm putting in the agendas, partly about my need for things to be organized and the way that I like them, more so than it is about anything else. And yeah, I think to some extent a factor of it was like, yes, you were new. Not that I had been at the company super long, but in startup time, it certainly seemed long. And yeah, there was that sort of uncertainty, but also some bias from my background, where I worked with a product manager who I would describe as extremely hands-off. And it was, in fact, the team lead who was responsible for organizing a lot of the meetings and a lot of the sessions. So just it's a conversation that needs to happen to make sure that we all do the right things. But I also feel that in a way, part of what the conflict was because you did have this engineering background. So it was like, oh, I'm going to write a Python script, you would say. And then you would have a Python script that does a thing. It was like, wait a minute, that looks like engineering.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about that. First of all, it's important to understand that it changes from team to team and within the same company and between companies, right? In the situation where I am right now, coming into a more established team, they already have all of their ceremonies. I can take a more hands-off approach, 100%. And then I'm looking at what value I can bring to the team. And that applies to this Python script situation as well. You can do a whole lot of things that I cannot. You can actually deploy working code. You can deploy a new microservice. You can debug, again, data pipelines, Kafka, message queues. I don't know, fancy engineering words. I can't do any of that. I don't, first of all, I don't have the permissions, credentials, and second, I don't have the knowledge. Your time as an engineer is much better spent on that. And I can do like the little Python script that works against a third party and pulls in information and puts it in a CSV. So I can do like some of the preparation. I can help offload some of these tedious tasks and let the engineers focus on what they need to do. Not every PM will do that. Not every PM should do that. Usually, I would say most PMs shouldn't do that. But again, if you have that ability to offload some of that work and let the engineers focus on what's important, then you should absolutely do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And everybody's contributing what they're best at is kind of necessary. Related to that, though, is how do you sort of not be a bottleneck in the team as a PM?
That's a hard one. Ideally, you want to empower the engineers to be able to make their own decisions. They should come up to the PM with, if they have a conflict between a couple of ideas, or if there's a material difference to what the functionality is going to be like. For example, we said this would do it in 3 seconds. Now it takes 3 hours instead. Is it still valuable to do this, or should we rewrite it? I'm thinking again in kind of database terms. What if we're talking in, let's say, our own and the work that we have done before around billing, monetization, that kind of stuff. If I come down and say this needs to have 25% VAT on it, and the engineer says I can't find the VAT code, I'm just going to ignore it. That's not great. So that kind of stuff, they should come back and like ask, what should I do, and get guidance. For all other things, ideally, they should have enough of the context ahead of time to be able to make their own decisions on that. And they should have enough domain knowledge. And if they don't, then that's on the PM to supply that.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense that people who have good domain knowledge will be able to make good decisions about what is supposed to happen or what makes sense. And this doesn't mean you have to be a master in accounting rules to write an accounting system, but you should have at least a baseline understanding of accounting principles. So,
and who you're serving. Again, who is the customer for this? What is the customer? How is the customer going to use that? The PM should definitely know that, and they should convey that to the people who are going to be writing the software. Or hardware or whatever, right, depending on the industry, because that is important in how you design, how you build things. It changes how you approach a problem. It changes how you solve this problem.
This actually opens up a bit more about sort of what interactions a product manager has with engineering team members who are not leading the team. Someone who is, say, a junior engineer or a mid-level engineer who doesn't participate as much in, say, planning or prioritizing or that sort of thing. And you mentioned a couple things already. One of them was about sort of giving context, and another was about sort of settling a disagreement or a difference of opinion on something. But what are your interactions like other than that?
Again, that differs from person to person. There will be people you work with, engineers that are fully capable of like looking at a Jira or Linear or whatever story and just rolling with it, and they want no interaction with you, and they just want to write the code and be done with it. Absolutely fine. Then your interactions are going to be quite limited, or they're going to be in the scope of a specific story. There will be people you want to handhold a little bit more, people who might be newer, who might not have all the context and domain experience yet. People who have just moved in from another team, for example, or just joined the company. So it's every case is different. You kind of want to gauge how the person likes working and adjust to that. And as a PM, you have to be aware of that. Not everyone is the same. Not everyone is going to give you the same level of detail. Not everyone is going to give you the same updates on things. Some people might even not want to update Jira tickets. Fine. You can take that off their plate, by the way. You can augment that. If they're a really good engineer, but they hate updating the tickets, you can work around that, right? So your interactions will really differ based on the person. I think that's okay. I think that should be encouraged because every person has the things that they're better and worse at. Same for me, same for you. Just like as a PM and as an engineering manager, we have to converse and find the ways that we like working. You have to do that with every individual team member as well. So the interactions will be different. You obviously like seeing them in the ceremonies that you have, in a stand-up if you have those. And I encourage everyone to participate personally. When we would run these sessions, everyone would be invited, but we would also make things optional. Remember? I don't want to force anyone to be in a meeting that they don't want to be in. If they don't want to participate in the planning, fine. Don't participate. Like,
I mean, I feel the same
but
way.
Then you kind of lose a little bit of that ability, right? You lose the ability to argue about things because you can't disagree and not show up and also disagree, and then that's not okay.
Yeah, but, and I feel that same way about, say, like a lecture, right? The like attempts to sort of force people to be present in the lecture are futile because they carry with them these little devices that they can use to mentally check out at any time. So it's pretty difficult if someone doesn't want to be there to make it productive if they're looking at their phone or their watch or otherwise not participating.
But for me, one of the important thing is to make it very clear that this is voluntary. You are there in order to potentially change things, in order to have an impact. If you don't want to be there, you don't have to be there. This is not a hostage situation.
Mandatory meetings are some of my least favorite words. Okay, but then how do you make it relevant so that someone who is a junior engineer who thinks, oh, I only want to write code, wants to attend a prioritization session or a retrospective or something like that?
It's going to sound stupid, but make it fun. In most of my teams in the past, and this because you were there as well, we would have themes. We would pick a theme for the week. We would have meme competitions, and we would encourage taking things a little bit lightly. It's work, right? It's just work, but you spend around 8 hours of your day at this workplace, and you need to have fun. If you're not having fun, then you're going to be disengaged. You need to have fun. And the company is not going to be the one providing that fun always. The company might be having a yearly company event. There might be clubs and groups and the occasional Slack message, but you need to have fun as a team. And you need to build that team, that accountability. And part of that means that, you need to participate. You kind of need to force people. If you are showing up, then you need to participate. Then you need to be present. But again, that won't work for everyone. And you will have people who don't want to participate, and you have to understand that as well. It's just different people have different levels of what they consider okay for work engagement.
Yeah, that's fair. And as you say, they are sort of giving up an opportunity to say something if they aren't attending. If they're not attending the retrospective, they're missing their opportunity to say, I don't like how we prioritize this, or I don't like how ticket sizes work. I think there should be a size smaller than the smallest size for fixing this null pointer exception. I was always amused at a previous place that the smallest size was 2 hours. It's like, it only takes me 5 minutes to fix this NPE, right? Can we please have a 1 hour size?
Yeah. But and that's also something that the engineer and the PM have to kind of agree. You shouldn't force yourself into the defaults that come from neither the company nor the industry. For example, today, everyone loves doing OKRs. They don't make sense for everyone. They don't make sense for every company structure.
Can you explain OKRs for viewers who are unfamiliar with it?
Sparkling quarterly objectives from Silicon Valley. No, it's a way to say, here's an objective. This is something we need to do in this quarter, half year. And here's how we'll measure if we've done a good job. 25% increase in signups. An example, right? You would have a few of those. Everyone loves doing them. They don't make sense for all teams. They don't make sense for all departments of the company. You can try to force it with mixed results, right? My point is, when you have a team, your loyalty is to the team to a great degree. And you need to find ways to engage that team and work with them. And if you create a lot of busy work for them and say, oh, please go in and update your OKRs every day, they're not going to be happy about that. That's not what they're there to do. You need to find a situation that works for them. If that means adjusting the cadence and you're not working in 4-week sprints, you're working in 2-week sprints or weekly Kanban, right? You should be able to do that. And if you aren't able to do that, then you need to make the case for that with the rest of your company to be able to do that, because you will need something that works for your team. And it's not a one size fits all. And you could have multiple teams in the same domain or group or department in the company, and they could work in different ways. And that's okay. If we look at a company that might be doing a SaaS solution and an on-prem solution, the time it takes to develop an on-prem hatch is vastly different from deploying something to GitHub Actions and having it just do something in magical Kubernetes, Amazon, whatever, right? The timescales are very different. So you're obviously not going to be working in the same way. Why should all the teams work in the same way as well?
Right. And I think also, this is a conversation I had recently with someone else, was around the idea of buy-in, that letting the team members be involved in choosing, how we do estimations, let's say, could actually be very interesting in terms of increasing their buy-in. Because if I show up and I say, I have decided we're using this method of estimation, people will do it, but there might also be some resistance. There will be people who think, estimations are stupid and why am I doing this? And if we let them have a say in how they do it, maybe that makes it more likely that they actually do.
Yeah, I think that stems from the same thing, right? You need to adapt the way that you work to the team. Having them come up with it, that's a great idea. A lot of times you get like this kind of negativity where I don't want to do this. That's the default reaction. And I understand that completely, because I'm like that too. Whenever I get when I wake up and I see 50 Slack messages from people requesting things, and my default is to say, no, I don't want to do this. It's annoying. It's a natural reaction, but you shouldn't let yourself fall into that. You need to look at it like objectively and say, okay, does this actually make sense? Is this a valid request? And you can ask questions and you can figure out things. The same is true for everyone on the team. You need to encourage that. So I don't want to do this. Why not? Can we come up with a better idea? Let's spend 10 minutes now and talk about it. If we can't come up with something better by the end of 10 minutes, then we're either doing this or we're not doing anything, right? Sometimes not doing anything is worse. And that's also something that you might want to discuss. But exactly, getting buy-in and having people involved in the decision-making is often a really good way to diffuse a situation like that.
And there is a part of me that wants to reject sort of administrative overhead type tasks, because why are we spending so much time estimating the thing when we could just get started and it would be finished?
It feels like overhead. It feels like overhead.
And it is, but not all overhead is wasteful, right? And there are certainly things that make no sense, and it is, if you ask me, right to decline to do those things that make no sense or whose costs outweigh the benefits. But on the other hand, there are administrative overhead tasks that do actually make sense. Updating tickets does matter. It does tell people about what is the progress of a thing, and if a ticket came about as a result of a customer called in and said, hey, this feature isn't working, the ticket system is your way of communicating back to your colleagues, the thing that you requested is done. Please notify the customer that the problem is fixed, and now they can do whatever they originally intended to do. So 100%. It's overhead, but it's not useless overhead.
Correct. And you can't always avoid the overhead. You can't even avoid the useless overhead, because what's useless to you might not be useless for someone else.
Indeed, and there will inevitably be management who wants some things tagged in the ticket system, so they can get overview of how many tickets were back end versus front end or something, and you might not care because it might not be relevant to you. It's obvious to you in reading it, but someone might need that. So
the way I look at it is, if I can do something that will avoid a meeting, then I will do it. If it's overhead that will prevent someone from contacting me and asking me, hey, can you please give me a breakdown of how many, then I will gladly oblige. I will do anything to avoid a meeting at this point.
Actually, tell me more about that. I mean, product managers are sort of associated with like, let's have a meeting. And so why do you want to avoid them? What's going on?
I'll tell you what. First of all, I think meetings are a little bit less inclusive. It's a realization I had relatively recently, and I feel like I should have had this earlier. Not everyone likes to speak up in a meeting. Even extremely knowledgeable people, very confident people, will sometimes struggle to speak in a meeting. And I think that's a shame. On top of that, it's really hard to share meeting information unless you're very diligent with writing down everything that went in a meeting, meeting minutes, decisions, that kind of stuff. A lot of the meeting content gets lost or becomes tribal knowledge that the people who attended kind of know what's going on. And memory tends to trick us. We tend to remember things in a different way than what was actually discussed. So I would much rather have like a 10-minute argument or conversation on Slack, and at least be able to look at something in the end and say, okay, we have decided this. I think that serves the organization a lot better in the long run. It serves the team better. It means that people who didn't attend can still see what happened. It means that people who maybe didn't want to speak up verbally could participate in text form. I think most people are okay with that. And on top of that, meetings, especially when we work in a remote kind of situation where a lot of people are not physically there, it takes time to set up a meeting, and then there's a little bit of niceties and, hi, how's everyone doing? Okay, you comment on something, then okay, let's get started.
And
does everyone know what we're talking about? There's a lot of overhead for these meetings on the topic of overhead, and you have to do it because it's part of what being a person is. But you don't do that in text. I prefer text for that. I think it maintains knowledge better. I think it's more inclusive. Plus, I have a shit ton of meetings, and I would like to have fewer of them. Right. I don't want to spend my entire day in a phone booth. I'd like to actually produce stuff and do research and discovery on tasks.
And Zoom fatigue is real.
Right? Yeah, it definitely is.
Earlier this year, I had a thing that was a full day Zoom meeting, and it was absolutely exhausting. Like, more so, like 8 hours Zoom meeting was, even though there was a lunch break and coffee break here and there, was somehow more exhausting than like 10-hour in-person event.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a very valid point. On the topic of in-person events, you should absolutely strive to have those with your teams. We had a couple of those, if you remember.
Oh, I do.
Which we worked out in like a 5-hour in-person meeting, off-site, on-site, whatever. In a 5-hour meeting, we worked out stuff that took 3-4 weeks to work out otherwise, because there were no distractions. We were all there in the moment. Everyone was there and willing to collaborate. Everyone was in the right mindset for that. Don't skip on in-person meetings with your team, even if it's not the entire team, as many people as you can gather. And yes, you can try to make them hybrid. Those are really hard to do, but it is worth doing just to, again, make it inclusive. Miro boards work wonders for that. But don't skip on the in-person meetings. They are vastly superior to Zoom and even text, which I just stuck out my neck for, honestly. But
things can be like true that seem contradictory, right? Because a solution might be good most of the time, but not all of the time. Or it may be the case that this option is good, but another option can be better.
Yeah.
So
Zoom works. Yeah, Zoom works fantastic for Zoom, Google Meet, whatever. It works fantastic for stand-ups and maybe company-wide events, like all hands. Cool.
Yes, a speak from the podium kind of.
Yeah,
event.
But for workshops and things like that, in person is king.
Although on the other hand, when it comes to the speak from the podium events, I always questioned, like, why is this a Zoom meeting? Where everybody's in the room. Like, if you're just going to read me the announcements from the slides, can't you just send me the slides, or record a video of the announcements? The Q&A part, yes, do that live. But I always questioned, does this have to be a meeting? Does it make sense?
And I think that's good guidance for all PMs. Should this actually be a meeting, or can we solve this in a more asynchronous way? And the answer is often, yeah.
Yes, although I will take the side of the meeting here, even though it hurts me a little bit in here, to say that sometimes, you know, a 5-minute meeting can save 10 back and forth emails.
They're never 5 minutes, are they?
No, they're not. But the work part is 5 minutes. But
Yeah.
you know, the setup and oh, I can't hear you. I have to change my headphones or whatever. That part you can't skip. So
Jeff, you're muted. Can you all see my
you know
screen?
what? You know what? The funny part is that, like, I actually looked down in the menu bar to see, like, did I accidentally mute myself there when you said that? Because that's such a common occurrence, right? Just automatic reaction, like looking and see, like, does the little microphone have the line through it? And I don't know that you'll ever be able to train that response out. So
there's something to be said for improving the UX on these conferencing, video conferencing tools, to make sure that you're not accidentally unmuting yourself or accidentally muting yourself.
Yeah, there's lots of horror stories on the internet of people who unmuted when they shouldn't have,
or opened their camera when they really shouldn't have. I've experienced one of those. I don't care to recall that story right now, but
yeah, let's keep it family friendly.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about in terms of working with a product manager as an engineer? The catch-all, what do you wish I'd ask you question?
There's one thing that's, I think, worth mentioning when you make that move from engineer to PM, which is kind of important. And I think engineers can help the PM in seeing that. You tend to, or I tend to, gravitate towards finding solutions and talking tech, the talking shop, right? It usually comes from a good place, but it kind of takes away some of the authority or agency that the engineers have. Because if a PM comes in and talks to them about a technical solution, then they probably know what they're talking about, right? And then I feel compelled as an engineer to maybe go down that route. And I've had that with PMs that I've worked with in the past. And I've done this as a PM as well. Sometimes you just gravitate towards it because it's interesting. It's a lot more interesting, again, than making a Confluence page or something. Let's talk shop. Tell me about the internals of this. And I think it would be wise not to do that and stay away from that as much as possible. And I think engineers should tell PMs off for that.
Okay. I see the temptation, right? Because it feels good to come to somebody not just with a problem, but also with a solution.
And you think you're helping.
Yeah. And because if you just come with a problem, it can seem like I'm complaining or I'm just telling you what to do. And identifying a problem is to some extent easier than solving it. There's a story that I can tell you. It was a long time ago because I was a co-op student at the time. Where I attended a presentation and it was about defect finding software. And the people presenting spent the overwhelming majority of the presentation explaining how well they understood the problem. Testing sometimes is inadequate to finding the problem, and test coverage doesn't always keep up with code development. And yes, okay, we had an hour meeting, and they spent the overwhelming majority of it talking about that and very little talking about the solution. Okay, why would we buy your product? We don't know if it solves the problem. And just recognizing that you understand the problem doesn't show us necessarily that you understand the solution. So I definitely understand why there is that temptation as a PM to come and say, this is what this is what you should do, as opposed to
and that's very dangerous because it often means that you focus on the solution and not the problem. And as I said, that takes away a lot of the agency. It takes the craft out of the engineering and turns it into a kind of feature factory type thing. Here's a feature, build this. Here's a feature, build this. And the PM will maybe know what the problem is, but if they're not articulating it and they're focusing on the solution instead, then that's a very boring way to work. And I think
it's just implementation. There's no design aspect to it.
Yeah. So the engineers and the engineering manager in particular should keep the PM in check on that. And there are multiple ways to deal with that. And one of the ways I work is I make myself stupid. I will either say stupid things or ask relatively stupid questions and have people explain it to me so that I understand if they understand the problem correctly. There are all these little techniques that PMs can use. But sometimes you need a mirror to your face and be like, hey, this is how you're behaving, and it's really harming the engineers. Don't be afraid to do that. We all make mistakes. We all come with good intentions, I think. Or you have to assume that people come with good intentions at the very least. And it's okay to tell people off.
No, I think that's a good point, because yeah, so some of the design aspect is important, and it's also like a growth opportunity if you are in engineering to focus on doing some of the design and not just here's a very step-by-step explanation of what to do, because that's not giving you as much opportunity for learning and practicing your skills.
Yeah, I still struggle with that, right? I still want to come with a solution because it's more exciting, it's more interesting, but you have to resist that urge.
Okay. Well, I think that's a good place to close out. So thanks for coming to talk with me today, and
of course, always
share some thoughts about being a PM and working with the PM. I hope you've had a good time, and I hope maybe you'll be willing to come back and have another talk if that suits you sometime soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I will just close it off by saying, don't become a PM. It's a horrible job. No, I'm kidding. It's one of that self-deprecation thing. It's a required part of enjoying your work is to make jokes about yourself.
Okay. So most important thing, this is what I've learned about being a PM, is you need to develop self-deprecating humor.
Yep, 100%. And good memory skills.
Yes, you said make work fun, so memory is the important part.
It's one way of doing it. Don't take yourself too seriously.
Something I need to improve on, not taking myself so seriously. All right. Well, thanks for the talk today.
Absolutely.